The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountainside as Commander Jake Mitchell adjusted his rifle scope one final time. His team of Navy SEALs had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days through the treacherous terrain of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The intel suggested their target, a notorious Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on American forces, was hiding in a compound just 2 kilometers ahead. Mitchell had served in the Navy for 15 years, leading countless missions across Iraq and Afghanistan. His men trusted him completely, and he had never lost a single soldier under his command. This mission was supposed to be routine: infiltrate, neutralize the target, and extract before dawn. But something felt different this time. The mountains were too quiet, and the intelligence seemed almost too perfect. The team consisted of 6 elite operators, each handpicked by Mitchell himself. There was Rodriguez, the team's medic and explosives expert who could patch up a wounded soldier while simultaneously defusing a bomb. Thompson served as their communications specialist, maintaining contact with base while monitoring enemy radio chatter. Williams was their heavy weapons expert, carrying the squad automatic weapon that could lay down suppressing fire when needed. Davis handled reconnaissance and surveillance, his keen eyes able to spot enemy movement from incredible distances. Finally, there was Peterson, the team's youngest member but already proving himself as an exceptional point man. As they approached the target compound in the pre-dawn darkness, Mitchell signaled for his team to take positions. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep rocky outcrops that provided excellent cover for both the defenders and any potential ambush. Intelligence reports indicated approximately 8 to 10 enemy fighters inside, but Mitchell's experience told him to expect twice that number. The plan was straightforward. Rodriguez would place charges on the compound's eastern wall, while Thompson jammed enemy communications. Williams would provide overwatch from a ridge 300 meters south, while Davis and Peterson created a diversion on the western approach. Mitchell would lead the main assault through the breach once Rodriguez's explosives created their entry point. Everything went according to plan for the first 10 minutes. Rodriguez successfully planted the charges and retreated to his designated position. Thompson confirmed that enemy communications were being jammed effectively. Williams reported clear fields of fire from his overwatch position. Davis and Peterson had moved into position and were ready to begin their diversion. Then the world exploded into chaos. The compound erupted in automatic weapons fire from positions that shouldn't have existed according to their intelligence. Muzzle flashes appeared from hidden fighting positions carved into the rocky mountainside, creating a deadly crossfire that trapped Mitchell's team in the valley below. The enemy had been expecting them, and they had walked directly into a carefully prepared ambush. Contact front. Contact left. Contact right. Williams shouted over the radio as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him. His machine gun chattered in response, sending streams of tracer rounds toward the enemy positions, but there were too many targets to engage effectively. Mitchell immediately took control of the situation, his voice calm despite the intensity of the firefight. Rodriguez, blow the charges now. Thompson, get me air support on the horn. Davis and Peterson, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. The explosion from Rodriguez's charges created a momentary distraction, allowing the team to begin their withdrawal. But as they moved through the rocky terrain, Mitchell realized they were being herded toward a specific area. The enemy fire was directed in such a way that it forced them to move along a particular route, which could only mean one thing: there was another ambush waiting. Stop. Stop! Mitchell commanded, raising his fist in the air. His team immediately froze in place, taking whatever cover they could find among the rocks. Mitchell studied the terrain ahead, his experienced eye picking out subtle signs that confirmed his suspicions. There were disturbed rocks, unusual shadows, and small reflections that suggested prepared fighting positions. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were caught between 2 groups of enemy fighters with limited ammunition and no easy escape route. Worse still, the radio communications with their base were being jammed despite Thompson's best efforts to break through the interference. Mitchell made the decision that would save his team's lives. "Listen up," he said over the radio. "I'm going to create a diversion. When I do, you follow Route Charlie to the extraction point. Don't wait for me, and don't come back." "Sir, we're not leaving you behind," Rodriguez protested, his voice tight with concern. "That's an order, Sergeant. Mitchell replied firmly. Get the team to safety. That's your mission now. Before anyone could argue further, Mitchell was moving. He sprinted toward the left flank of the enemy position, drawing their fire away from his team's escape route. His rifle barked repeatedly as he engaged multiple targets, using every piece of cover available to stay alive just a little longer. The plan worked perfectly. The enemy fighters shifted their attention to Mitchell, allowing his team to slip away through the rocky terrain toward their designated extraction point. But Mitchell's situation became increasingly desperate as more enemy fighters emerged from hidden positions, surrounding him on three sides. He fought with the skill and determination that had made him legendary among the SEAL community. His shots were precise and deadly, each bullet finding its target despite the chaos surrounding him. But ammunition was limited, and the enemy numbers seemed endless. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio one last time. "Commander, we're at the extraction point. Helicopter inbound in 5 minutes. What's your position?" Mitchell's response was barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Negative on extraction. Continue with mission. Tell my wife, tell her I love her." Then the radio went silent. Williams tried desperately to reach their commander, calling repeatedly over the radio, but there was no response. The team watched helplessly from their extraction point as explosions lit up the mountainside where Mitchell had made his stand. The incoming helicopter hovered for several minutes while Thompson pleaded with the pilot to wait, but fuel constraints and enemy fire eventually forced them to depart. The flight back to base was the longest of their lives. Each man dealt with the loss in his own way, but all were united in their refusal to accept that their commander was truly gone. Rodriguez stared out the helicopter window, replaying every moment of the mission, and wondering what they could have done differently. Thompson clutched his radio, hoping against hope that Mitchell's voice would suddenly break through the static. Williams cleaned his weapon methodically, preparing for the rescue mission he was already planning in his mind. Back at the forward operating base, the news of Mitchell's disappearance sent shockwaves through the entire command structure. Mitchell was not just any SEAL commander. He was a decorated veteran with 3 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star, a man who had successfully completed over 200 combat missions without losing a single team member. Within hours, search and rescue operations were being planned, but the mountainous terrain and heavy enemy presence made immediate action impossible. Drone surveillance of the area showed no signs of life at the ambush site, and intelligence analysts concluded that Mitchell had most likely been killed in action. His team refused to accept this conclusion. They knew their commander better than anyone, and they believed that if anyone could survive in those mountains, it was Jake Mitchell. Rodriguez volunteered for every reconnaissance mission in the area, hoping to find some trace of his commander. Thompson spent hours monitoring radio frequencies, listening for any signal that might indicate Mitchell was alive. Williams requested transfer to any unit that might be operating in the region where their commander had disappeared. But as days turned into weeks with no contact and no credible intelligence suggesting Mitchell had survived, even his most loyal teammates began to lose hope. The official designation changed from missing in action to killed in action, body not recovered. Memorial services were planned and the painful process of notifying next of kin began. Mitchell's wife Sarah received the news with the stoic strength that military spouses develop over years of deployments and dangerous missions. She had always known this day might come, but knowing and experiencing the reality were two very different things. Their 2 young children, Emma and Michael, struggled to understand why their father wouldn't be coming home from this deployment. The SEAL community rallied around Mitchell's family, providing support and assistance in the difficult days following the notification. His teammates visited regularly, sharing stories and memories while helping with practical matters. But beneath their support was a burning desire for answers and, if possible, revenge against those responsible for their commander's fate. Meanwhile, intelligence analysts worked around the clock to understand how their mission had been compromised. The enemy had clearly been prepared for their arrival, which suggested either a significant intelligence failure or worse, a security breach that had exposed their operational plans. Every aspect of the mission was examined and re-examined, but no clear explanation emerged. The Taliban commander they had been sent to capture remained at large, and his propaganda videos began appearing on jihadist websites within days of Mitchell's disappearance. In these videos, he claimed to have killed an American Special Operations commander and promised that more would follow. The videos were analyzed for any clues about Mitchell's fate, but they provided no definitive proof of his death. 3 weeks after the failed mission, Rodriguez received permission to lead a small reconnaissance team back to the ambush site. The area had been quiet since Mitchell's disappearance, with no reported enemy activity. Satellite imagery showed that the compound had been abandoned shortly after the battle, with the Taliban fighters apparently melting back into the general population, as they often did following successful operations. The reconnaissance team found evidence of the fierce firefight that had taken place: bullet casings, blast craters from grenades, and bloodstains on the rocks. But they found no trace of Commander Mitchell, either alive or dead. It was as if he had simply vanished into the harsh Afghan landscape. Rodriguez knelt at the spot where they believed Mitchell had made his final stand, picking up one of his commander's spent bullet casings as a memento. The silence of the mountains was overwhelming, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the rocky peaks. He whispered a promise to the empty air. "We'll find you, sir. We won't stop looking until we bring you home." Unknown to Rodriguez and his team, their commander was indeed still alive, though barely. Mitchell had managed to escape the immediate area during the confusion of the firefight, but he had been wounded in the process. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, and shrapnel from a grenade had peppered his legs. More critically, he had become separated from his equipment during the escape, losing his radio, GPS unit, and most of his medical supplies. For 3 weeks, Mitchell had been moving through the mountains, avoiding enemy patrols while trying to reach friendly forces. His survival training served him well, allowing him to find water and basic food sources, but his wounds were becoming infected, and his strength was fading with each passing day. He had witnessed Rodriguez's reconnaissance team from a distance, hidden among the rocks above the ambush site. Every instinct told him to reveal himself, to call out to his men and end this nightmare. But he had also spotted enemy fighters observing the area, waiting to see if the Americans would return. Mitchell realized that showing himself would only result in his capture and potentially endanger his rescuers. So he remained hidden, watching helplessly as his team searched for him before departing empty-handed. The emotional toll of seeing his men and being unable to contact them was almost worse than his physical injuries. He knew they blamed themselves for his disappearance, and he desperately wanted to let them know that their actions had saved lives and that he was proud of each of them. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Mitchell began planning his next move. He was getting weaker each day, and he knew that time was running out. If he was going to survive this ordeal and see his family again, he would need help. But in this hostile environment, surrounded by enemies and far from friendly forces, help seemed impossible to find. What Mitchell didn't know was that help was indeed coming, though from an unexpected source. High in the mountains, watching through a high-powered scope, a figure observed the area with professional interest. The observer had been tracking the movements of both American and Taliban forces in the region, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to act. This observer was unlike anyone else operating in the area. Years of training had created skills that few could match, and a personal motivation drove actions that would soon change everything. The observer had seen Mitchell's team during their reconnaissance mission and had noted the intensity of their search. More importantly, thermal imaging equipment had detected a heat signature in the mountains that didn't match any known Taliban positions or American operations. Someone was out there, alone and possibly wounded, trying to survive in terrain that had claimed countless lives over the centuries. The observer made a decision that would soon set in motion events that would reunite Mitchell with his team and provide answers to questions that had haunted the SEAL community for weeks. The stage was set for a rescue that no one saw coming, led by someone whose identity would surprise everyone involved. In the harsh mountains of Afghanistan, where survival was measured in hours rather than days, a legend was about to emerge from the shadows to bring a lost warrior home. The morning mist clung to the mountain peaks like ghostly fingers as Sarah Chen adjusted her rifle for what she knew would be the most important shot of her life. For 5 days, she had been tracking the wounded American Special Operations soldier through the treacherous terrain of the Hindu Kush Mountains. What had started as routine intelligence gathering had become something much more personal when she realized the man she was following was the same Commander Mitchell whose team had been searching desperately for him. Chen was not supposed to be in Afghanistan. Officially, she didn't exist. Her military records had been classified at levels that few people even knew existed, and her very presence in the region was part of an operation so secret that only a handful of people in Washington knew about it. She was what intelligence professionals called a singleton, an operator working alone, with no official support or recognition, carrying out missions that required absolute deniability. Her background was the stuff of military legend, though few people knew the full story. Born in San Francisco to parents who had emigrated from Taiwan, Chen had grown up speaking multiple languages and developing the cultural adaptability that would serve her well in later years. Her father had been a mathematics professor, her mother a former military officer in the Taiwanese army, who had taught her daughter that excellence was not optional and that gender was never an excuse for settling for second best. Chen had enlisted in the Marine Corps immediately after graduating from Stanford, with degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies. Her test scores were perfect, her physical fitness evaluations were consistently outstanding, and her psychological profiles indicated someone with the rare combination of intelligence, emotional stability, and controlled aggression that made for exceptional special operations personnel. She had progressed through Marine reconnaissance training with scores that broke several records, particularly in marksmanship and survival skills. Her instructors noted that she seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and weather conditions, skills that allowed her to make shots that other snipers would consider impossible. But it was during her deployment to Iraq that Chen truly distinguished herself. Operating as part of a joint special operations task force, she had accumulated a confirmed kill count that exceeded most snipers with twice her experience. More importantly, she had demonstrated the ability to operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods, gathering intelligence and neutralizing high-value targets with a precision that earned her the respect of even the most seasoned operators. Her legend had been cemented during a mission in Fallujah, where she had spent 6 days alone in enemy territory, methodically eliminating a terrorist cell that had been responsible for multiple attacks on American forces. Working from positions that changed daily, she had taken out 12 targets over the course of the operation, each shot fired from a different location, and each one contributing to the systematic destruction of the enemy network. The mission reports from that operation had been so extraordinary that they had been classified immediately, and Chen had been recruited into a program that existed in the shadows between different military branches and intelligence agencies. For the next several years, she had operated in some of the world's most dangerous locations, always alone, always successful, and always invisible. Her current mission in Afghanistan had begun 6 months earlier when intelligence agencies had identified a network of Taliban commanders who were coordinating attacks across multiple provinces. Traditional military operations had failed to penetrate the network because its leaders were too skilled at blending into the local population and disappearing whenever conventional forces approached their areas. Chen had been inserted into the region with a simple mandate: identify and eliminate the leadership of the network, using whatever methods she deemed appropriate. She had established herself in the mountains, creating a series of concealed observation posts and safe houses that allowed her to monitor enemy movements across hundreds of square kilometers. Her success rate had been remarkable. Over the course of 5 months, she had eliminated 8 high-value targets, each death appearing to be the result of factional fighting or internal disputes rather than American military action. The Taliban network had begun to fragment as its leadership disappeared one by one, and attacks on coalition forces in the region had dropped by 60%. But Chen's mission had become complicated when she had observed the ambush that had trapped Commander Mitchell's team. From her position high in the mountains, she had watched the entire engagement through her rifle scope, noting the professional skill with which both sides had conducted the battle. She had been impressed by the SEAL team's tactical discipline and their commander's willingness to sacrifice himself to ensure his men's escape. She had also been disturbed by the sophisticated nature of the ambush, which suggested that the Taliban forces were receiving better intelligence and training than previous assessments had indicated. Most importantly, she had seen Mitchell's escape from the immediate battle area. While his team and the Taliban fighters had focused on the main engagement, Chen's elevated position had given her a clear view of the wounded commander as he slipped away from the battlefield and began his desperate journey through the mountains. For the first few days, she had simply monitored his progress, noting his route and assessing his condition from a distance. Her training told her not to get involved. Her mission was to observe and eliminate specific targets, not to rescue wounded American soldiers. But as she watched Mitchell struggle through the terrain with infected wounds and dwindling strength, her professional detachment began to give way to something more personal. Mitchell's survival skills were impressive, but he was fighting a losing battle against time and his injuries. Chen could see that he would not last much longer without medical attention, and she knew that his team's search efforts were focused on areas where he was no longer located. The decision to intervene had not been easy. Revealing herself to Mitchell would compromise her mission and potentially expose an operation that had taken months to establish. But Chen found herself thinking about the families she had seen at military bases, the wives and children who waited anxiously for their soldiers to return home. She thought about her own family and the sacrifices they had made to support her career. On the fourth day of Mitchell's odyssey through the mountains, Chen made her choice. She would bring the lost commander home, regardless of the consequences for her mission or her career. But first she had to deal with the Taliban fighters who were also tracking Mitchell's movements. She had identified at least 12 enemy fighters who were following Mitchell's trail, moving in small groups and coordinating their search through radio communications. They were skilled trackers, and they were gradually closing the gap despite Mitchell's best efforts to avoid detection. Chen had decided to eliminate the pursuit teams before attempting to make contact with Mitchell. Working from positions that allowed her to observe multiple routes through the mountains, she began systematically targeting the Taliban fighters who posed the greatest threat to Mitchell's survival. Her first shot came at dawn on the fifth day, when one of the pursuit teams had stopped to rest in a valley less than 2 kilometers from Mitchell's location. The target was a Taliban sub-commander who was coordinating the search efforts through a handheld radio. Chen's bullet took him from a distance of 800 meters, the shot fired from a concealed position that gave her a clear view while remaining invisible to the other fighters. The death appeared to be the result of a sniper from an entirely different location, which caused the Taliban fighters to scatter and begin searching for threats from multiple directions. This confusion bought Mitchell additional time while his pursuers dealt with what they perceived as a new enemy force. Over the next several hours, Chen eliminated 4 more Taliban fighters, each shot taken from a different position, and each one designed to further confuse and demoralize the enemy forces. Her tactics were psychological as well as tactical. She wanted the remaining fighters to believe they were facing a larger force and to abandon their pursuit of Mitchell in favor of their own survival. The strategy worked perfectly. By afternoon, the surviving Taliban fighters had consolidated into defensive positions and ceased their pursuit of Mitchell. Radio intercepts indicated that they believed they were facing a coalition special operations team and had requested reinforcements before continuing their mission. With the immediate threat eliminated, Chen finally moved to make contact with Mitchell. She had been tracking his movements throughout the day and knew that he had taken shelter in a cave system approximately 3 kilometers from her current position. His condition had deteriorated significantly, and thermal imaging indicated that his body temperature was dropping to dangerous levels. The approach to Mitchell's location required careful planning. Chen knew that the wounded commander would be extremely cautious about revealing his position and might react with potentially lethal force if he perceived her as a threat. She needed to identify herself in a way that would convince Mitchell she was friendly, while avoiding the possibility that Taliban fighters might overhear her communications. As the sun began to set over the mountains, Chen moved to within 200 meters of the cave where Mitchell had taken shelter. Using a combination of hand signals and carefully placed equipment, she began sending signals that any American Special Operations soldier would recognize as friendly. She started by placing a small infrared strobe light in a position where it would be visible from Mitchell's location, but not from the surrounding area. The strobe pattern was a specific sequence that identified her as an American operative. Next, she used a small mirror to reflect sunlight in a pattern that spelled out friend in Morse code. For several minutes, there was no response from the cave. Chen waited patiently, knowing that Mitchell would be studying her signals carefully and trying to determine whether this was an elaborate trap or a genuine rescue attempt. Finally, a small piece of white cloth appeared at the cave entrance, waved 3 times in the international signal for surrender or parley. Chen responded by standing slowly and moving into partial view, her hands clearly visible and her weapon slung across her back in a non-threatening position. She called out in a voice that was loud enough for Mitchell to hear, but not so loud that it would carry to distant listening positions. "Commander Mitchell," she said clearly. "I'm Gunnery Sergeant Chen, United States Marine Corps. I'm here to get you home." The response from the cave was weak, but unmistakably American. "Prove it." Chen had anticipated this challenge. She pulled out a small device and began transmitting a coded message that would identify her to any American military personnel who might be listening. The transmission included authentication codes that changed daily and were known only to authorized personnel. After several minutes, Mitchell's voice came from the cave again, stronger this time. "How do you know who I am?" "I've been watching you for 5 days, sir," Chen replied. "I saw your team's extraction, and I've been tracking your movement through these mountains. Your men are looking for you, but they're searching in the wrong areas." There was a long pause before Mitchell responded. "Are you alone?" "Yes, sir. This is not an official rescue mission." "I was in the area conducting other operations when I observed your situation." Another pause. "Then, what's your unit?" Chen hesitated for a moment, knowing that her answer would raise more questions than it answered. "I'm assigned to a classified joint task force, sir. I can't provide more details over an open channel." This seemed to satisfy Mitchell, at least temporarily. "I'm wounded," he called out. "Gunshot wound to the shoulder and shrapnel in both legs. Possible infection." "I have medical supplies," Chen replied. "I'm going to approach your position slowly." "Please don't shoot me, sir." As Chen moved carefully toward the cave, she reflected on the surreal nature of the situation. She had spent months operating alone in enemy territory, eliminating high-value targets and gathering intelligence that would never be officially acknowledged. Now she was about to risk everything she had worked for to rescue a man she had never met, for reasons that she couldn't entirely explain even to herself. But as she reached the cave entrance and saw Commander Mitchell for the first time, she knew she had made the right decision. The wounded SEAL was barely conscious, his face gray with fever and his uniform soaked with sweat. His shoulder wound had become badly infected, and his legs were swollen from the shrapnel injuries. "Sir," she said quietly as she knelt beside him, "I'm going to get you out of here. But first, we need to deal with these wounds." Mitchell's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "Who are you?" he whispered. Chen began unpacking her medical supplies as she answered, "Someone who understands what it means to be lost behind enemy lines, sir. Someone who knows that no one gets left behind." As she began treating Mitchell's wounds, Chen was already formulating the plan that would get them both out of the mountains alive. She knew the terrain, she had eliminated most of the immediate threats, and she had the skills necessary to move an injured man through hostile territory. But she also knew that the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. Getting Mitchell back to his team would require crossing territory controlled by enemy forces, avoiding patrols that would be looking for both of them, and doing it all while keeping a wounded man alive. As night fell over the Afghan mountains, Chen began the process of preparing Mitchell for what would either be a successful rescue or a final stand against overwhelming odds. Either way, she was committed now. The legendary female sniper had emerged from the shadows, and she would not rest until she had brought the lost commander home. The journey that would become legend began at 3 o'clock in the morning, when Chen helped Commander Mitchell from the cave where he had been slowly dying for 5 days. She had spent the previous hours treating his wounds with her limited medical supplies, cleaning the infected shoulder injury and removing shrapnel from his legs. The antibiotics in her field kit had brought his fever down slightly, but Mitchell was still far from being in condition to travel. "Can you walk, sir?" Chen asked quietly as she supported Mitchell's weight against her shoulder. Mitchell tested his legs carefully, wincing as pain shot through the shrapnel wounds. "I can walk," he said through gritted teeth. "How far do we need to go?" Chen had been studying her maps and calculating distances while treating Mitchell's injuries. The nearest friendly forces were at a forward operating base 42 kilometers to the southeast, but reaching them would require crossing 3 major valleys and 2 mountain ridges, all of which were known to be patrolled by Taliban forces. 43 kilometers to the FOB, she replied honestly, "but we're not going there directly. I have a safe house 12 kilometers from here where we can rest and resupply before making the final push." What Chen didn't tell Mitchell was that her safe house was one of several caches she had established over months of operating alone in the region. Each cache contained food, water, medical supplies, ammunition, and communications equipment that would allow her to continue her mission regardless of circumstances. She had never intended to use them to support a rescue operation, but the supplies would be essential for keeping Mitchell alive during their journey. The first phase of their movement took them through terrain that Chen knew intimately. She had spent weeks mapping every trail, every rock formation, and every potential hiding place in the area. More importantly, she knew the patrol patterns and habits of the enemy forces who controlled the region. Moving with a wounded man through hostile territory at night required skills that few people possessed. Chen had to navigate by memory and instinct while constantly monitoring Mitchell's condition and watching for signs of enemy activity. Every step had to be carefully planned, every rest stop chosen for its concealment and defensive potential. Mitchell's respect for his mysterious rescuer grew with each kilometer they covered. Despite his wounds and fever, he could appreciate the professional skill with which Chen moved through the darkness. She seemed to anticipate obstacles before they appeared, choosing routes that avoided enemy positions while providing maximum concealment from observation. "You've been operating in this area for a while," Mitchell observed during one of their brief rest stops. "Several months," Chen replied as she checked his bandages. "I know these mountains better than most of the people who live here." "What's your mission?" Mitchell asked. Chen hesitated before answering. Her operational security requirements prevented her from revealing details about her assignment, but she felt she owed Mitchell some explanation for her presence in the region.
"I'm hunting bad guys," she said simply.
"Same as you, just different methods." As dawn approached, they reached Chen's first safe house, a carefully concealed shelter built into a rock formation that was invisible from more than 20 meters away. The cache contained everything they needed to survive for several days, including thermal blankets, high-energy food, medical supplies, and a satellite communication device. While Mitchell rested, Chen used the communication equipment to monitor radio traffic in the region. What she heard was disturbing but not entirely unexpected. Taliban forces were conducting sweeps throughout the area, searching for what they described as American Special Operations soldiers, and offering substantial rewards for information leading to their capture. More concerning was the intelligence indicating that the enemy had brought in additional fighters from neighboring provinces, including some with experience fighting American Special Operations forces. The Taliban commanders clearly understood the propaganda value of capturing or killing American personnel, and they were committing significant resources to finding Mitchell and Chen. "How does it look?" Mitchell asked when Chen finished monitoring the radio traffic. "They know we're here, and they're looking hard," Chen replied. "But they don't know exactly where we are or which direction we're heading. That gives us an advantage if we use it correctly." Over the next several hours, Chen developed a plan that would maximize their chances of reaching friendly forces while minimizing their exposure to enemy patrols. The route she chose was longer and more difficult than a direct approach, but it would take them through terrain that was less likely to be under enemy observation. The plan involved 3 more stages of movement, each designed to bring them closer to the forward operating base, while avoiding areas of known enemy activity. Between each movement phase, they would shelter in one of Chen's prepared safe houses, allowing Mitchell to rest and recover while Chen gathered intelligence about enemy movements in their path. That evening, they began the second phase of their journey. Mitchell's condition had improved significantly after a day of rest and proper medical attention. But Chen could see that he was still struggling with the effects of his injuries and the infection that had nearly killed him. The terrain they crossed that night was some of the most challenging Chen had encountered in months of operations. Steep rocky slopes covered with loose scree made every step treacherous, while narrow ridges exposed them to observation from multiple directions. Worse still, the weather was deteriorating, with low clouds reducing visibility while increasing the risk of hypothermia. It was during this phase of their journey that they encountered their first serious opposition. Chen had been monitoring radio traffic throughout their movement and knew that enemy patrols were active in the area, but she had hoped to avoid direct contact by careful route selection and timing. The Taliban patrol consisted of 6 fighters moving along a trail that intersected their planned route. Chen spotted them first, using her night vision equipment to observe their movement patterns and assess their level of alertness. The enemy fighters appeared to be conducting a routine patrol rather than actively searching for specific targets, which meant they might be avoided with careful maneuvering. But Mitchell's condition complicated their options. He was moving slowly and would not be able to cross the exposed ground quickly enough to avoid detection if the patrol maintained its current course. Chen made the decision that would define the rest of their journey. She would eliminate the patrol to protect Mitchell and ensure their continued movement toward safety.
"Sir," she whispered to Mitchell, "I need you to stay in this position and remain absolutely silent for the next 10 minutes. Do not move regardless of what you hear." Before Mitchell could respond, Chen had disappeared into the darkness, moving with a silence that seemed impossible given the rocky terrain. Mitchell waited in the concealed position she had chosen, listening to the night sounds of the mountains while wondering what his mysterious rescuer was planning. The first indication that Chen had engaged the enemy came in the form of a barely audible sound, the distinctive crack of a suppressed rifle fired from an elevated position. Over the next several minutes, Mitchell heard 5 more shots, each fired from a different location, and each followed by radio traffic from the enemy patrol that grew increasingly desperate. When Chen returned to Mitchell's position 15 minutes later, she moved as silently as she had departed. "The route is clear," she said simply. "We can continue." Mitchell had served in special operations for most of his military career, and he had worked with some of the most skilled operators in the American military, but he had never witnessed anything quite like Chen's performance that night. She had eliminated an entire enemy patrol without raising an alarm, cleared their route of obstacles, and done it all while protecting a wounded man who would have been helpless if discovered. "How many?" he asked quietly. "6," Chen replied as she helped him to his feet. "They won't be reporting our position." The remainder of that night's movement proceeded without incident, but Mitchell could see that the encounter had changed something in Chen's approach to their situation. She was more alert, more cautious, and more focused on potential threats. The elimination of the patrol had been necessary for their survival, but it had also announced their presence to enemy forces throughout the region. They reached Chen's second safe house just before dawn, and she immediately began monitoring radio traffic to assess the enemy response to the previous night's contact. What she heard confirmed her fears. Taliban commanders were now convinced that American Special Operations Forces were operating in the area, and they were mobilizing additional resources to find and destroy them. "They know we're here now," Chen told Mitchell as she changed his bandages. "The next phase is going to be much more dangerous." Mitchell studied the map while Chen worked on his wounds. Their current position was approximately 25 kilometers from the forward operating base, but the direct route would take them through several areas that were now likely to be crawling with enemy fighters. "What are our options?" he asked. Chen pointed to a route on the map that wound through some of the most difficult terrain in the region. "We go the hard way," she said. "Through country that's so rough they won't expect anyone to attempt it. It's going to be brutal, especially with your injuries, but it's our best chance." The route Chen proposed would take them over 2 mountain ridges and through a valley system that was known for its treacherous conditions. The terrain was so difficult that even local residents avoided it when possible, which meant it was unlikely to be patrolled by enemy forces. But the route would also test both their physical capabilities and Mitchell's will to survive. The climbs would be exhausting for a healthy person, potentially deadly for someone recovering from gunshot wounds and shrapnel injuries. Worse still, the weather forecast indicated that a major storm system was moving into the area, which could trap them on exposed ridges with no shelter. "I can make it," Mitchell said after studying the proposed route. "When do we leave?" Chen looked at him carefully, assessing his condition and his determination. She had seen many wounded soldiers over the course of her career, and she knew that survival often depended more on mental strength than physical capability. Mitchell had the look of someone who would not quit regardless of the obstacles they faced. "We rest until nightfall," she replied. "Then we make the final push." The day passed slowly as both of them prepared for what they knew would be the most dangerous part of their journey. Chen conducted final maintenance on her equipment, checked and rechecked her maps, and monitored enemy radio traffic for any indication of their search patterns. Mitchell focused on conserving his strength while mentally preparing for the physical ordeal ahead. As evening approached, they could hear the distant sound of helicopters conducting search patterns throughout the valley systems below them. The enemy was clearly committing significant air assets to finding them, which meant that concealment would be even more critical during their final movement. "Ready, sir?" Chen asked as darkness fell over the mountains. Mitchell shouldered his pack, testing his balance and checking his weapon one final time. "Let's go home," he replied. The final phase of their journey began with a climb that pushed both of them to their physical limits. The mountain ridge they had to cross rose almost vertically from their starting position, and the rocky surface provided little in the way of secure footing. Chen led the way, finding routes through the cliff face that a normal person would consider impossible. Mitchell followed grimly, each step sending waves of pain through his wounded legs and shoulder. But he had made a promise to his team and his family that he would come home, and he was not going to break that promise now. The storm hit them halfway up the ridge, turning an already dangerous climb into a fight for survival. Rain and sleet made the rocks slippery and reduced visibility to mere meters. Wind gusts threatened to tear them from their precarious holds, while lightning illuminated the mountain peaks in stark, terrifying detail. But Chen continued climbing, somehow finding routes through terrain that seemed impassable. Her knowledge of the mountains and her incredible physical conditioning allowed her to not only survive the storm, but to help Mitchell survive as well. They reached the summit of the ridge just as the worst of the storm passed, leaving them exhausted but alive on a narrow saddle between two peaks. From their position, they could see the lights of the forward operating base in the distance, still 15 kilometers away but now clearly visible. "Almost there," Chen said as she helped Mitchell find shelter among the rocks. The descent from the ridge was nearly as challenging as the climb had been, but now they had gravity working in their favor. More importantly, they were moving into an area that Chen knew was regularly patrolled by friendly forces. The danger from enemy fighters was decreasing, but the risk of being shot by American sentries who might not recognize them was increasing. As dawn broke over the mountains, they reached the final valley before the forward operating base. Chen could see American patrol positions on the ridges above them, and she knew that their journey was nearly over. But first, she had to make contact with the base without getting them both killed by nervous guards who might mistake them for enemy infiltrators. Using her satellite communication device, she established contact with the base operations center and began the complex process of identifying herself and arranging safe passage. "This is Guardian Angel," she transmitted using her operational call sign. "I have a package for delivery. Request immediate coordination for safe passage." The response came immediately. "Guardian Angel, this is base operations. Authentication required for package delivery." Chen provided the necessary authentication codes and Mitchell's identification information. Within minutes, the operations center had confirmed Mitchell's identity and status, and the base commander was personally coordinating their safe extraction. An hour later, a heavily armed patrol met them at the entrance to the valley. The patrol leader, a young army captain, stared in amazement at the unlikely pair approaching his position. A wounded Navy SEAL commander and a small Asian woman carrying a sniper rifle. "Commander Mitchell?" the captain asked uncertainly. "That's correct, Captain," Mitchell replied, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Sir, your team is going to be very happy to see you," the captain said with obvious relief. They've been conducting search operations for 3 weeks. As they walked toward the forward operating base, Mitchell turned to Chen with a question that had been bothering him throughout their journey. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you risk everything to save someone you'd never met?" Chen was quiet for several minutes before answering. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Because that's what we do," she said. "We don't leave anyone behind, regardless of the cost." Within hours of their arrival at the base, Mitchell was reunited with his team in an emotional scene that brought tears to the eyes of hardened Special Operations veterans. Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, Davis, and Peterson had never stopped believing that their commander was alive, and their joy at his safe return was overwhelming. But even in the midst of the celebration, Mitchell made sure that Chen received the recognition she deserved. He insisted that her role in his rescue be documented, and that she receive appropriate recognition for her actions. Chen's response was typical of her character. "I was just doing my job, sir." The official reports of Mitchell's rescue were classified at the highest levels, and Chen's role was acknowledged only in documents that few people would ever see. But within the special operations community, the story of the legendary female sniper who had brought home a lost commander became the stuff of legend. Mitchell returned to his family a changed man, with a deeper appreciation for the bonds that connected all American service members, regardless of branch or mission. He had experienced firsthand the meaning of the military's most sacred promise, that no one gets left behind. Chen returned to the shadows from which she had emerged, continuing her classified mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. But she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important mission is not the one you were assigned, but the one that your conscience demands you accept. Years later, when Mitchell had retired from the Navy and was telling stories to his grandchildren, he would always remember the night when a guardian angel had appeared in the mountains of Afghanistan.
proving that heroes come in many forms and that courage knows no boundaries. The mountains kept their secrets, as mountains always do.
But those who were there would never forget the legend of the female sniper who emerged from nowhere to bring a lost warrior home.